So today our discussion about AI SOC, AI in the SOC continues. And here we have William from Andesite. Welcome, William.
Thanks so much, Anton. Happy to be here.
Sure, same here. So let's look at what happened recently. Of course, we've all seen the news, new releases for models that are discovering vulnerabilities much faster. They can chain vulnerabilities. They can build exploits. So this seems like the offensive side, the attacker side, have been given a whole bunch of new weapons. How does it affect the blue side, the defensive side? I mean, you're working on things related to SOC and detection and response. What's your view? Like, are we losing as defenders, or is our turn next? Like, what's your impression about this whole thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the latest AI in the hands of attackers is an evolution. We've been talking about getting hacked at internet scale and machine speed for a long time, and botnets and all of these things, right? So hackers have been trying to, scale up and be able to do more with less for a long time. This is definitely a powerful technology in their hands, and I think from their perspective, it evolves the cause even further. Fortunately for us, I don't actually think all is lost. The sky's not falling, and I think a lot of these technologies are extremely useful for blue teams as well.
So it's the idea is basically that we now see evidence of attackers benefiting, but there would also be evidence about defenders benefiting very soon. That sounds like the gist of an answer, is that there's nothing of this is inherently for attackers.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, what it really does, at a very simple, at a non-technological level, this type of AI really lets cyber operators, whether they're on offense or defense, sort of apply, human-like reasoning at scale with volumes of data and across vast swaths of the internet. And, so it's an accelerant. It makes everything they do more efficient, but there's nothing that's specifically nefarious about the tech. There's nothing that's specifically good about the tech. Just like technology since the dawn of time, it can be used for good, it can be used for evil.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that one of the areas with the most rapid development on the AI for good, for defenders, is, of course, AI inside the Security Operations Center, detection response team. And as an observer of that for at least several years, I remember at RSA last year, 2025, I've asked a lot of people about how to actually measure the effect of bringing AI to security operations, to detection teams. And last year, the answers were kind of spotty. This year, I felt like they were a little better. But my sense is that the hype is there, and hype is kind of overrunning the value, but the value is also there. So what is your impression about this? How do you measure the advantages of having AI in the hands of a defender in the SOC? Or, as my podcast co-host often asks, what gets better in the SOC once you deploy AI?
Yeah, really good question. And I definitely want to come back to the topic of hype, because I think that's really interesting right now for anybody who's looking at AI SOC tech. There's too much of it. But to answer your question about value capture, how do we know how much value we're delivering to our customers? This is frankly an area the entire industry needs to work on. I agree with your rough timeline assessment. I think a year ago, nobody was particularly good at this. Now, I'll speak from Andesite's perspective. What we've gotten very good at capturing and delivering to our customers right in their product is sort of the human efficiency gains and the acceleration of some of the historic metrics. Now, I think that's a transitional capability that we're delivering to industry, to be able to say, oh, okay, since you started using Andesite, your mean time to detect, to respond, to close, all of these things are getting better, and you can track this over time in your SOC performance dashboard. But what I think will happen in the long run is that some of the longstanding metrics will actually become obsolete. So, for example, mean time to investigation will continue shrinking and shrinking and shrinking until eventually, at some distant point in the future, it will become almost meaningless, and we'll need new metrics. But right now, as a transition, we've gotten good at capturing the sort of the standard SOC performance metrics, and as we extend continually into the response to the right of analysis and to the detections to the left of analysis, a lot more work needs to be done there. I don't think anybody's particularly sophisticated on measuring that value just yet.
Yeah, I like your answer a lot, and for a couple of reasons. I think that it has elements of a lot of stuff we don't know yet, and it's absolutely fair. You can have a cynical take on this, but you can also take a very optimistic take on this. This tech is new, and it's absolutely okay, and moreover, it's necessary to experiment to understand where things would improve. So, for example, a lot of AI SOC vendors rushed to alert triage. But as some other colleague in the industry wisely pointed out to me recently, we don't really need to triage if the machine can fully investigate. If triage implies you triage and you hand it to somebody, whether it's a robot or a human, but if you have a machine inside your SOC that can investigate all alerts, there's no triage. Triage is sorting things to what to do. But if you can always do the investigation, you may get value. Similar argument applies to detection. If you're triaging things well, but your detection is just not well done, likely you're solving the wrong problem. You need to apply AI to speeding up the AI threat intel to detection flow. So all of this basically points at use cases. So do you have any favorite use cases for these technologies? Like, again, you can say alert triage and you'd be like everybody else, but you can also say something else, like any favorite use cases for this.
Yeah, well, I like what you just said. I agree with it. And I don't even really think of alert triage as the use case that we address. I do think of it as alert investigation. Now,
Yes,
at
excellent.
Andesite, if you've seen any of our materials, you know we're very avowedly in favor of something we call human at the helm
Mhm.
AI. So it's our human AI collaboration model. And we really believe it is an integral part of the long-term journey for this tech. So at Andesite, we talk a lot about self-driving cars as an analogy to simplify this for people. That what what basically happened was a lot of players in this space jumped to, hey, buy our car, it will sort of, drive itself. And that's not the way the technology needs to develop. So the AI SOC tech that we have available to us now is very powerful. It can contribute some really useful value to the SOCs, and our
Mhm.
customers are extremely excited about how much faster their people move, how much more risk they can treat when they have Andesite, right? It
Yep.
accelerates everything, accelerates the entire OODA loop, basically. I know that you've talked about the OODA loop in the past.
Yeah. Fun.
The observe, orient, decide, act, for anybody who's not familiar with that. So, so to go back to answering your question with this alert investigation, what is I think the tech is really effective at already is sort of taking the alerts, correlating them. So instead of going
Yep.
through individual alerts, now you have meaningful activities grouped together, enriching those alerts. According to what we call enrichment playbooks or configurable agents, we have a lot of configurability built into our platform. And
Yep.
so the individual user analyst can sort of tweak the way that they want that enrichment and that subsequent analysis to take place. And so by the time an analyst with our human AI collaboration model opens up an enriched investigated alert group, it's already fully contextualized as if some analysts had spent an entire business day or more, already sort of going through that. But there are
Yep.
key places where the analyst can see all the work. We have this concept we call evidentiary AI. Everything is exposed to the analyst so they can see it. They can intervene if they disagree with an assumption that was made.
Yep.
It can be reinvestigated, et cetera. So that's where the human part comes in. But by the time if you sit down at Andesite, by the time you look at a bunch of alerts, they are, to your point, already essentially investigated and ready to be dispositioned. And in fact,
Yep.
as the final kind of most recent step that we're having a lot of fun with is, we now have customers using our configurable agents to auto disposition alerts when they feel comfortable doing that.
So this is actually a really useful take, frankly, that full investigation as opposed to triage to decide between who would do what next. But you also hinted at another theme I want to touch, and I've had a pretty fierce debates, with people calling each other names around the SOC without any humans, because from everything you said, you are making humans better, you're 10x in, you're 50x in them, you're however much you're improving their efficiency. The numbers here are secondary, but it is around the human. And occasionally I do see people, usually it's the kind of like a SOC manager boss's boss, who thinks that the medium to long term trend of this is that the humans are just going to be gone and robots will do the work completely from, well, basically all of the work. So I violently argue about this in the short term. I argue about this in the medium term. And I don't say anything about the long term because, frankly, we have no idea what will happen. What is your impression about, like, what do you tell if your client says, oh great, your tech is workable, I'm going to deploy it, I'm going to use it, but actually my goal is that in 3 years I'm just going to fire every human, not just in a SOC but in a detection and response capability altogether, and your tech would do the work. What is your reaction to this?
Yeah, really great question, and we get into this debate obviously because of what we do for a living all the time.
Yep. Yep.
I will tell you, this won't generate a lot of creative tension for the purposes of this discussion, but I do largely view this space similarly to the way you do. I think in the immediate term, we really haven't run into anybody who thinks like you can joke about, do you walk into a SOC and say, we need 3 volunteers to install our tech and then you're all out of work? Like there's no implementation path in the immediate term. I don't think that's not a viable discussion. Everybody understands the technology is immature. The teams are using it to be more efficient, but there's no immediate path. We do every once in a while get a question from a board director or CFO or something about why can't you just automate all this end to end? And you're able to walk them through. The full self-driving car thing is really handy for this conversation to be able to say the tech just isn't there. And if a product company is coming to market saying the tech is there, that should be a red flag. And you should actually be very concerned about how realistic their roadmap and adoption paths that they're paving for you, how they are. In the medium term, we tend to talk about Andesite in terms of the human efficiency it delivers. And we start out with every implementation, with every new customer, we say, keep all your skaters on the ice. Right? You don't know how much risk you're not treating right now. Enjoy that all of your analysts are going to become wildly more efficient, and let that float and see how that works for you. Realistically, in the longer term, I can't control if our customers decide, hey, I'm going to cap hiring, or I'm going to let my workforce attrit a little bit. But we certainly are not coming to market encouraging people to think of our tech as something that replaces their humans. We think that's really the wrong way to look at it. And then in the extremely long term, as you said, nobody really knows for sure. But the way that we think about it at Andesite is that over time, our concept of human at the helm does involve less and less stuff in the human-driven workflows.
Yep.
And more of it sort of migrating to the dashboard, if you will. So human at the helm becomes this concept of there are lots of loops that don't have humans in them because humans would slow them down, but the humans are monitoring things like the risk tolerances and the performance of those loops. And where they're intervening is to, influence or somehow nudge the various automated workflows. This is extremely long-term stuff, but that's how we think of it. We don't have an endpoint at Andesite at which we believe that you should even want to remove all the humans from your cybersecurity workflows.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that I don't know if you invented the human at the helm term, but I kind of like it because I probably would steal it, because I feel like the enough of the human in the loop, human on the loop discussions end in a ditch, because people say I don't want to be in the loop, or I want to be in the loop, but if I've not been coding for a year and you dump 700 of really messy code on me in my lap and say, sorry, robot cannot handle it, you human help, the result is hopeless. And again, the self-driving car analogy is working here well, where if you have been driven by a car for a year, and then in a year the car suddenly grabs your hand and says, sorry dude, this one is too tough, you handle it, it's not going to go well. So I think I like the human at the helm metaphor, and if you invented it, I'll try to give you credit if I use it. If not, then we both stole it from somebody else. I want to touch, so this is like really quite good, and I really like the idea that human at the helm is the model, or the kind of like a true north, but it isn't about getting rid of humans. It's not about like toss the human out. I think the toss the human out is going to end in a ditch much faster than people assume.
Yeah,
So
I agree with you.
yeah, given the time, I want to touch on a somewhat adjacent problem, and it's interesting because it's unrelated to what we discussed, but it's actually kind of subtly related. I do see people who show up at my door and say, because of agents, because of AI agents specifically, we don't have to centralize data for security, because I can task the agent to go look for data, and if data is stored in a S3 bucket, or in GCP somewhere, or in a Dropbox, or I don't know where, machine can find it, can find credentials, authenticate, get the data, and then it would analyze it or have you analyze it. So they have this naive positive view of agents driving decentralization, federation of data, federated security analytics. But on the next day, somebody else shows up and says, Anton, do you know that agents would confidently decide based on incomplete data, and they would usually be wrong if the data they need is not available? And I say, yeah, I've seen those cases. So if the agent is tasked to do something and it finds 3 out of 5 data sources, it would decide based on 3, and likely it would be wrong. So in that sense, centralization or quality of data and better centralization is also driven by the agents. Any reactions to this? I mean, please don't hit me with the default federated is winning, because I don't see it outside, but I also don't think federated is stupid. I used to think that, but I don't think that anymore. So
yeah, well, we definitely, one of our technology value props is to let you leave data where they are. So that is, leaving the data islands federated and allowing the AI to sort of normalize on the fly between all of those data sources. That is definitely something that we've spent a lot of time and attention on at Andesite, and it works quite well. But our position on this question you're asking is way more nuanced than that. We actually have an excellent blog post by our CTO, Alex Thaman, if anybody wants to read more about this. But we believe that, it's time for cybersecurity to have a new data architecture. And just like we don't like the hype when people oversell what this technology can do, we don't like it when people oversell one model over the other. And there are definitely scenarios where centralized data is going to feed better analytics, more performant, more complete, more accurate. So there is a role for centralized data. We're not zealots where we say don't ever centralize data. We also think some of the reasons for centralizing data have been misunderstood. A lot of times you really just need to accumulate logs. I'm thinking back to your iHeart Logs days with your
Yeah,
teammate, right? Sometimes you just need those for compliance reasons, and you don't have to put that in a very expensive centralized data store. You can sometimes store those in less expensive local data sources closer to the source. So think of like a really verbose NDR box that produces a ton of logs. Do you really need all of that in your SIM? You absolutely don't, and we can show that to customers in their environment, right? So, so there's a trade-off, and depending on the analytics scenario, you want to have the flexibility in your enterprise environment to be able to sort of tailor the approach depending on what it is you're trying to accomplish. This really all starts with what's the business question you're trying to answer, and then build the analytic to answer it, and then support that analytic with the appropriate data architecture.
I think that while you're giving me a version of it depends answer, I think ultimately it's the absolutely correct answer. That if you need the data stored for exactly 15 months and that type of data, and it needs to be there for an auditor or an assessor, you centralize. I don't think decentralized, hope for the best kind of approach will work here. But at the same time, for many other type of data, if you're paying per gigabyte for some of the stuff of your own money, you're doing it wrong. So I kind of like the sort of like a obvious but also kind of wise answer of it depends. You build an architecture that allows you to centralize and decentralize based on the use cases. I really like that. So I wanted to, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to quickly add to that. We have this concept of adaptability with our platform, and I'll give you a live example of what that means. So we were working with a government customer, and we found out that they wanted to centralize a lot of data for what essentially boiled down to experimental reasons. And so what we showed them was you can leave the data where they are. You can, sort of play with the analytics and see if you're getting the response you want. And then if you look at a scenario where you need to run that analytic at volume and at scale for a long time, then maybe you centralize some of the data. But it can actually save you upfront investments it allows you to break away from this mentality of I have to centralize everything all the time in order to have good cybersecurity.
Yes, and I think I really like that. And I think that adaptable here is probably the only answer I would take, because we can argue about which one is better until we are blue in our faces. But the answer is there's still completely unsolvable problem for being all centralized, like money, and completely unsolvable problems for being all decentralized, such as this data has to be there, rain or shine, for 12 months. So I really like that. I think we are almost at time, so I want to start closing with a closing sort of a summary. I feel like we are still at the beginning of the AI SOC journey, and while there are some clients that claim to have value, the industry needs to agree about where the value would come from. That's probably one important point we both made. What centralized, decentralized? The answer is probably going to be yes, and as long as you're adaptable, you'd succeed. And I feel like the use cases, alert triage has to be essentially evolved to alert investigation by machines. And then you wouldn't be thinking AI SOC, oh yeah, that's a triage system. That's how I would summarize it. Anything to add, William?
No, I think you really nailed it. Thanks a lot, Anton. I appreciate it.
Perfect. This was a good discussion. Hopefully it would be very useful for the audience as well.